The morning Callie Marsh saved Pastor Whitmore's life, he was already planning how to destroy hers. She didn't know that part yet. She was 16, standing in the paint aisle of Dillard's Hardware on a Tuesday afternoon. When the feeling hit her, that warm, pepper-sharp pressure rising from her sternum like a slow exhale, and she turned to Mr. Dillard behind his counter and said, flatly, without preamble, "Don't leave the space heater running tonight. The wiring near the east wall of your storage room is going to start something you can't stop." Mr. Dillard laughed. He always laughed. Most of Millhaven laughed, or went quiet in that particular way that meant they were deciding whether to be afraid of her or annoyed by her, and they almost always landed on annoyed. "Callie Marsh," he said, shaking his head. "Lord Almighty." She bought her paint roller and left. 41 hours later, the east wall of his storage room had a scorch mark the size of a dining table and 2 fire trucks in the parking lot. Mr. Dillard told everyone it was faulty wiring. He told no one about the girl who had warned him. He had blocked her on Facebook instead, which in Millhaven was essentially a public execution. This was Callie's life, had been since she was 13. The knowing came, specific, unhurried, indifferent to whether she was welcome. And she said it, and people hated her for being right almost more than they would have hated her for being wrong. At least if she were wrong, they could dismiss her cleanly. Being right made her something worse. Proof that the world held things they couldn't control. She had been escorted out of the Henderson Thanksgiving table, drenched with a cup of ice water by Widow Bauer at the farmer's market. Reported to the school counselor 3 times for concerning behavior. Each report filed within a week of a warning that landed exactly as she'd said it would. She had been called jinx, called unwell, called attention-seeking, called a witch in the comments of the Millhaven Community Facebook group by an account that everyone knew belonged to Deborah Simmons, even though it was named MH_concerned_resident. None of it was the hardest part. The hardest part was knowing that the man behind all of it, the quiet rot underneath every bad thing that had happened to Millhaven in 11 years, was Pastor Gerald Whitmore of Grace Covenant Church, and that she had known this since she was 13 years old, and that she had never told a single living person. Not because she was afraid. She was afraid, yes, but that wasn't the reason. The reason was that she had tried. Once. She had pulled Priya Chandran aside in the school hallway. Priya, who tutored with her at the library, who had never been unkind, and she had said, "Carefully, I think Pastor Whitmore arranged the Mercer foreclosure." And Priya had looked at her with an expression that Callie had filed away and never forgotten. Not cruel, just deeply, exhaustedly sorry, and said, "Callie, you can't just say things like that about people." So she had stopped saying it. She had found other ways. She left anonymous tips. She redirected quietly. She told the right people the right things without ever naming the source of the rot. Like a doctor treating symptoms because the patient refuses to hear the diagnosis. She was their shield, and they had no idea. And she told herself it was enough. It was not enough. She was standing at the edge of the Founders' Day Gala on a warm Saturday night, holding a glass of sparkling cider she hadn't touched, watching Pastor Whitmore work the crowd with that architectural smile of his. Built, not felt, perfect in every dimension, when the knowing arrived so hard and specific it knocked the breath from her lungs. Asterisk Mayor Ellis. The study. The document Whitmore has him signing. He doesn't know what's in it. It has to be tonight. Asterisk. She stood with it. Breathed through it the way she'd learned to. The way you press on a bruise to confirm it's real. It held. She knew what it meant. Mayor Roy Ellis, decent, unremarkable, 12 years of quiet service, was about to unknowingly sign away Henley Green, the last public land in Millhaven, into a private trust. Whitmore's trust. A development deal dressed in conservation language, buried on page 7 of a 40-page document designed to be unread. She knew she would be thrown out. She knew this with the same certainty she knew everything. Not because she was psychic about her own fate, but because she had been thrown out of every room in this town and the architecture of rejection had become familiar. She set down her cider and walked toward the house. The volunteer at the door knew her face. Of course she did. In Millhaven, Callie Marsh's face was known the way storm warnings were known, something you recognized and braced against. Callie, hon, guests aren't going inside tonight. She stepped around the woman. She heard the sharp intake of breath behind her, the quick footsteps, the whispered someone get her mother, and she kept walking up the carpeted staircase, past framed photos of Whitmore shaking hands with every county official from the last decade, past a grandfather clock that read 11:42, and she thought 18 minutes, and pushed open the study door without knocking. The room was dark except for the brass desk lamp throwing amber light across a wide mahogany desk. Mayor Ellis sat behind it in his navy blazer, pen in hand, already turned to the signature page. He was a slow, careful reader, had been, Callie knew, his whole career. But Whitmore had spent 3 weeks explaining this document verbally, thoroughly, in language that made the reading feel redundant. Whitmore stood behind him. One hand rested on the mayor's shoulder in that pastoral way of his, guiding, not gripping. His other hand held a glass of bourbon, relaxed. He looked up when the door opened. Something happened behind his eyes. Fast. Gone before anyone else in the room could have caught it, but Callie caught it because she had been watching his eyes for 3 years and she knew what lived there under the warmth. He recognized her, not just as the town inconvenience, as something specific, as a threat. And then the smile returned full wattage, and he said, Callie, in the voice of a man who was already 3 moves ahead, and she felt the first real cold finger of fear she'd felt all night. Don't sign that, she said to the mayor. Roy Ellis blinked, looked at her. He was the kind of man who found it very difficult to be rude, which had always been both his virtue and his vulnerability. Callie, Whitmore said again warmly, setting down his bourbon with a gentle clink. This is a private meeting, sweetheart. You shouldn't be up here. Page 7, she said, her eyes on the mayor. Read page 7. She's confused, Whitmore said, already moving, not toward her, toward Ellis, positioning himself. This has been a challenging season for Callie. Her family has had a difficult. I'm standing right here, Callie said. The door filled behind her. It happened fast, the way it always happened in Millhaven when she was the subject, the rapid crowd assembly of a small town that had been waiting for exactly this kind of confirmation. Mrs. Henderson appeared first, then Bud Greer from the zoning board, then 2 of the mayor's staffers, then Deborah Simmons, who had driven 40 minutes round trip to be at this gala and was not going to let the evening be wasted. This child has been disruptive all night, Mrs. Henderson said. She approached my nephew last spring, someone else offered, as though this were relevant. Lord, not again, Bud Greer said under his breath. Mayor Ellis had set the pen down. He was looking at Callie with that particular look she had memorized from too many faces. The look that said, I almost believe you, and I am frightened of what that means, and it is much easier not to. Read page 7, she said directly to him. One more time, clear as a fire alarm. And then Whitmore did something she hadn't expected. He laughed, gently, sadly, with his whole chest, the laugh of a man burdened by patience. Roy, he said, why don't you go ahead and take a break? I'll handle this. The crowd parted for the mayor. Ella stood slowly, gave Callie one last long look she couldn't fully decode, and walked out of the room. She was alone with Whitmore. The crowd was still in the doorway. She could feel them. But Whitmore raised one hand, the small, graceful gesture of a conductor, and said, give us just a moment. And the door swung partially closed, and suddenly the amber lamplight held just the 2 of them, and the unsigned document and the grandfather clock she could hear ticking from down the hall. Whitmore looked at her. He didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't change his expression in any dramatic way. He simply looked at her with the mask fully. Finally, quietly off, and the thing underneath was not monstrous in the way she'd expected. It was worse. It was calm. It was patient. It was the face of a man who had done many difficult things and experienced them as logistics. "You've been a thorn," he said pleasantly, "for a very long time." Her heart was hammering. She held still. "I know what you do," he said. And the words landed strangely because they were the first words anyone had ever said to her that acknowledged the knowing directly, without mockery, without that exhausted pity. It should have felt like relief. It felt like the opposite. "I've known for 2 years. You leave tips. You redirect. You tell the right people the wrong things to protect people who can't stand to be in the same room as you." He tilted his head slightly. "It's almost beautiful. In a sad way." She said nothing. She was doing the math, the crowd outside, the mayor somewhere downstairs, the document on the desk still unsigned. "Go home," Callie said. "Go home, and don't come back to anything I'm attached to, and I will spend the rest of my life in this town being Gerald Whitmore, and you will spend the rest of yours being Crazy Callie, and everyone will be fine." "He hasn't signed it yet," she said. "He will. Tomorrow morning, with a full night's sleep and no theatrics." He smiled. "You've already lost this one." The door opened behind her. The mayor's aide, young, firm-handed, had returned. Callie was walked out of the study, down the stairs, through the garden, past the string lights and the champagne, and the faces she had grown up seeing at Christmas pageants and PTA meetings and Sunday potlucks. Faces that watched her removal with the relieved expressions of people who have had a wasp escorted out of a picnic. The iron gate swung shut. She sat on the gravel road and pressed her scraped palm against her knee and breathed. 17 minutes. She had one thread left. She found him selling the last of his groundnut packets near the parking lot. A 12-year-old boy named Marcus, who sometimes helped at the library on Wednesdays, who owed her nothing, who had once told her she was the only person who didn't talk to him like he was stupid. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I need you to go back inside and find Priya Chandran. She's wearing a green dress. Tell her, page 7. Read it before she sleeps. She pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand. "Give her this." He looked at her scraped palm, looked at the paper, looked at her face. "Okay," he said, and went. Callie sat back on the gravel and looked at the gate and waited, because there was nothing left to do but wait, and she had become very good at that. What she did not know, could not have known, because even her knowing had edges, was that inside the study, while the crowd had been filling the doorway, Mayor Ellis had quietly picked up the document. He had not gone downstairs. He had stood in the dark corner of the hallway outside the study and listened to every word Whitmore said through the gap in the door. "You've been a thorn for a very long time." Roy Ellis had served 12 years because he had a quality that looked like weakness and was actually the rarest thing in small-town politics. He was genuinely ashamed of himself when he did something wrong. And standing in that hallway with the document pressed against his chest, he felt the cold creep of a shame he hadn't earned yet, but could see himself earning clearly, and it was enough. He went back to the desk. He turned to page 7. He read it. Then he read page 8, page 9, pages 11 through 14, which contained the subsidiary clauses that his lawyer friend in Atlanta would later describe as audacious and almost admirable in their concealment. He was still reading when Priya Chandran knocked on the study door at 11:59 with Callie's folded note in her hand and found the mayor already sitting with his phone to his ear, the document open to the signature page, and signed, and the expression on his face like a man who has bitten into something and discovered the taste of something rotten where he expected sweetness. The story broke on a Wednesday. Not just Henley Green. The Mercer land. The clinic. 11 years of careful, patient, tied dress theft, unspooling across 2 counties and 4 news cycles, and 1 very long deposition in which Gerald Whitmore's lawyers kept using words like mischaracterized and contextual nuance, while the documents said what documents always say when no one is bothered to hide them well enough. He was arrested on a Thursday, which was the day he had scheduled a community breakfast in the church fellowship hall. The fellowship hall his clinic money had built. The irony was noted by everyone and said aloud by no one, because Millhaven was still, in the end, a town that preferred its ugliness unremarked upon. Callie heard about the arrest from Marcus, who texted her a screenshot at 7:43 in the morning before she'd had coffee. She sat with it in the kitchen in her flannel shirt and socks, gospeled the three-legged dog pressed against her shin, and felt something she almost didn't recognize because it was so unfamiliar. Not vindication. Not relief exactly. Something quieter, like a sound you've been hearing so long you stop noticing it, and now it's gone, and the silence is enormous. Her phone buzzed again. Priya this time. You knew the whole time, didn't you? She started to type, I just try to make sure the right people read the right pages. Deleted it. It was true, but it wasn't the whole truth, and she was tired, for once, of giving people the edited version. Yes, she typed. Since I was 13. 3 dots. A long pause. Then, I'm sorry we made that so hard. She put the phone face down on the table and looked out the window. The morning was gold and still. The pine trees at the edge of the yard holding the light the way they always did in early Georgia mornings, like they were trying not to spill it. Mayor Ellis called at 9. He was brief in the way decent men are when they owe debts they can't fully repay. I should have read page 7 myself, he said. Yes, she said. Not unkindly. Just honestly. Mrs. Henderson left a casserole on the porch. Deborah Simmons remarkably sent a text that said, I owe you an apology and nothing else, which was incomplete but which Callie understood was the maximum distance Deborah Simmons could travel toward accountability, and she accepted it as the small hard miracle it was. Mr. Dillard didn't apologize, but when she walked past his hardware store on Friday, he held the door open for her, which in the specific dialect of stubborn old men was a full and complete confession. She snapped Gospel's leash on at 4 in the afternoon and walked him out to the old highway, the long flat stretch of road that ran between Millhaven and the next town over, bordered by tall pines and wild grass going copper in the October light. She walked because the knowing was already rising again, warm and specific in her chest, something new incoming, and she had learned that movement helped, that if she was already going somewhere when it arrived, it felt less like a burden and more like a direction. She thought about what Whitmore had said in the study, you've been a thorn, and she turned it over and looked at it in the new light. She had spent 3 years trying to be soft enough that they'd let her stay. Quiet enough, indirect enough. She had protected a town that drenched her with cold water at the farmer's market, and she had done it without flinching, and she would likely do it again, because the knowing didn't ask for permission, and neither, it turned out, did her own conscience. But she was done editing herself down to a size they found manageable. Gospel trotted beside her with his cheerful, uneven gait, unbothered by his missing leg in the way that animals are unbothered by their own scars, simply incorporating them, moving anyway. The highway stretched ahead, longer than it looked. She kept walking. The new knowing settled in her chest, sharp and warm, and she let it, didn't fight it, didn't soften it, didn't pre-apologize for whatever it was about to make her say to whoever needed to hear it. She was Callie Marsh. She had always been right. She was done being sorry about it. In Millhaven, the stories about her changed. Slowly, imperfectly, the way small towns change anything, which is to say with great resistance and eventual, grudging surrender to the obvious. Asterisk, she was still unsettling. She was still too direct. She still said things that made people set down their coffee cups. Asterisk. But when she walked into a room now, people got quiet in a different way. Not the quiet of dismissal, the quiet of listening.